Mavis Camera comes with a number of monitor assist tools to help you get the most out of your recordings. Like this green sparkly stuff we can put over the image. Now this doesn't get recorded, so why is it there? Well, let's find out. The first thing to do is find out where you get it from, and that's this little button here, which is the Monitor Tools menu. Tap that and we can see a curated list of exactly the tools you need. How do I know it's exactly the tools? It's because you can curate your own list. Okay, so let's have a look at what we've got in there. First of all, we have some focusing tools. These help you get the focusing right, especially if you're in manual mode. We then have exposure tools. We also have framing guides, and we also then have some info tools as well. So let's have a look at each one of these tools and see how we can use them. And we're going to start with that green sparkly thing, focus peaking. What it does is it looks at the image and it finds any bits of the image that are high contrast. And those high contrast images we then mark with a green pixel. So you can see the bits in that image that should be in focus because they are high contrast. Now, it's great if you're shooting the beach, but what if you're in a forest? I don't necessarily want green everywhere because I've already got green everywhere. So with all the tools, if you tap and hold on the button, you get this little pop over and you can configure the tool. So in this case, I can change the color to blue, which is useful. I can also turn on and off the tool while that menu is open so I can A/B what I'm doing. Let's stick with focusing and move on to the expanded focus tool, which is a magnifier. What this does is magnify the image. It doesn't zoom it, it's literally like you're getting a magnifying glass and looking at your screen. You can move around the image and find out what you're looking at, and you can just make sure that the image is correct. We've got a little thumbnail at the top there to show you where you are, and you can use multiple tools at once. I mean, I could put focus peaking on here and still see exactly what's going on. Right, now let's have a look at some of the exposure tools, and we're going to have a look at false color now. And what false color does, it can be a bit weird. It changes the color of the image. And again, this isn't recorded, this stuff. This is only here for you to see while you're recording. And what this does is it changes the color so that the value of the brightness is represented by a color. So anything really dark is blue, anything really bright is red, and everything in the middle is those individual colors. So you can see here, for example, the clouds, they're quite bright. Now they're not 100% bright, but they're pretty bright. Same with the middle, they're kind of pretty middly green there. And you can see at the bottom, they're pretty dark, but they're not completely dark. And what this means is that I've got room to pull this in post. I can also see the details. I can see in the blue, there's a lot of detail there. I can see it. It might be difficult to see if I'm actually shooting, but it means that if I need to rescue that wall, I know I can pull it out. I do a lot of filming in studios where we've got black drapes and bits of set around, and what I want to know is that I can't see it. So again, it's a very useful tool to see the details. Now we have another false color, which is also called false color ranges, and that shows you basically a monochrome image, but with individual bits of the color picked out there. So you can see just specific pieces of exposure information. And then a feature that a lot of people have asked for actually, which is blue only. And what this does is it removes all the red and green from the image and draws the blue channel only as a monochrome image. Okay, let's move on to zebras. Yeah, okay, I call them zebras because I'm from the south coast of the UK. If you call them zebras, that's absolutely fine. They just do different stuff. I just can't get that through my head. So let's have a look at zebras. And when I turn them on, I'm looking at the sparkly bits in the clouds there. And I've set my zebras to be at about 80%. Now, I can move that down and I can change the level that my zebras are going to react to, and I can set it to whatever I want. One of the things I can also do is add a second set of zebras, but they're not in here. So I need to go and add those to the list. Now this is very easy. I can just go up to settings. And now what I'm going to do is scroll all the way down to Zebras B. And then when I go into Zebras B, I'm going to use this switch, which says Show in Monitor Tools. And the Show in Monitor Tools switch then pops that in the menu. Obviously by the reverse, you can take stuff out. So now I can turn on Zebras B, and I've got Zebras B set to about 60 to 70%, which is the sweet spot of stuff I like to be exposed correctly. So if I've got a face or something like that, and if I look and I've got the blue zebras on it, I know it's exposed correctly. Now the next tool we're going to look at works a little bit better in landscape, so let's go in that way, and these are video scopes. And we have two scopes actually. We can use the vector scope or the waveform one, it doesn't matter, you can choose the size and which ones you want to view. The vector scope is looking for color, especially on an iPhone actually. This is very useful because typically, I mean my phone, for example, at night goes a little bit orange, that's how I like to set it up. I don't want to know that my shot is orange. So I mean, I need to know what the color actually is. And if I'm looking at a nice orange picture, it might just be that my phone is in orange mode. So it's good to see there on the Vectorscope that this image actually is orange. The waveform monitor though, that is for exposure. And what I'm doing there is graphing the exposure across the picture. So if I look at these points on the exposure and the picture, you can see as I draw across the screen, you can see the exposure change. And you can see the exposure is getting higher there towards the right-hand side because that's where the sun is and it's a bit brighter. You'll also notice down here that there's a darker patch as well. That's because the wall is over on that right-hand side too. Okay, now the next tool is not in the menus, and I don't want it to be in the menus. It's the anamorphic lens tool. I never use it myself, so I don't really want it in the menus. Or you might use it every day, so therefore you might want it in the menus. But I'm going to go and get it from the settings, and what I'm going to do is just turn the activation switch on. This is going to enable the tool, but it's going to keep it out of that menu for me. And what it's going to do is it's going to stretch that image so that now if I'm using an anamorphic lens, it looks correct. I'm not using an anamorphic lens, so that just looks wrong, so I'm going to turn it off. Okay, now let's have a look at the framing guides. These are really useful to do things like the rule of thirds. But one of the things you can also do is use the portrait safe guides, and these are really useful if you've got to shoot two modes at the same time. So yeah, I'm shooting in landscape, but I need to make sure it's croppable later in post to go into portrait. So I could say, well, there's the middle, that's useful for portrait, except that's not a particularly very good shot. However, over on the side, yeah, that will work. So I know that my shot will work in portrait. But what happens if I'm shooting in portrait? Well, that's a pretty tricky problem, but actually I've now got that as the landscape safe. So now I know that I've got a landscape safe version if I want it. Now I know we're throwing away bits of pixels, I know we're throwing away resolution, I know it's not ideal, but a lot of people need to shoot this way. A lot of people need to shoot in one orientation but have a secondary orientation as a backup because they know it's going to go out on a different channel. So this is an ideal way of doing it. Okay, let's carry on by looking at the flip feature. Now you can flip the image, particularly useful if you're, I don't know, shooting into a mirror, or maybe you're just generally hanging upside down and you want to put the picture the other way up. This is useful and you can flip it in any direction. Now, for the last tool in the framing category, let's have a look at the aspect overlay tool. This overlays an aspect ratio helper and it helps you to frame your shot if you're going to be targeting a different aspect ratio in post. For example, here I think we're doing 2.3 to 1. I can adjust the opacity of the black bars there, which is particularly useful if you want to see less of the surrounding image. But I can also change the aspect ratio. So for example, if I go to 16:9, then it might be useful for me to put the action and title safe areas on, especially if I'm going to traditional broadcast. This of course also works if you tip it into portrait, as of course does things like square, because that's something that is agnostic between, because it's just a square. So there we go. Now let's have a look at the final tools, which are the informational tools. And first of all, we've got the VU meter. This is a big VU meter. If you turn it on, you get the big VU meter. But if you look to the button next to it, we've also got the info HUD. This also has a little VU meter on it, which is pretty useful. But that info HUD you can configure. You can take things in or you can take things out of it. In fact, you can make it so small that you've just got the time code sitting there on its own, if you like. Or in fact, well, you don't have to have it on at all. So those have been the monitor assist tools in Mavis Camera. Mavis Camera is completely free. Everything I've shown you is completely free. I'm going to pop a link in the description if you want to download Mavis Camera, but that's it. If you want to know any more, have a look at one of these vids. But for now, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.